Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Hi there. Welcome back to another episode of the Estranged Heart podcast. I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Today's episode is titled Respect versus Obedience. Is respecting elders just because an outdated practice? Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to go over some reminders of offerings that the Estranged Heart is having for those who might be interested. To begin with, we are having a webinar this Wednesday, July 26th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And that webinar is titled How to Find a Therapist. If you're wanting to find a therapist but don't know where to start, if you've been trying to find a therapist, haven't had much luck, perhaps you're confused as to what type of therapist might work best for your needs, those types of things. If you can resonate with any of those, this might be a webinar for you. If you're wanting to also be more empowered in selecting a therapist, kind of knowing a little bit more about the profession so that you can ask questions based off of your specific needs and desires to help you find support throughout your estrangement journey, this is a webinar for you. I will be hosting and facilitating this webinar. And again, I have almost a decade of experience working with therapists and understand all the ins and outs of their education and training and credentials, etc. And this is a question that I get often is how do I find a therapist? Where do I start? I don't even know what to do. So if that is you, this is a webinar for you. And I will include the link for registration in the show notes of today's episode. And again, that is on this Wednesday, July 26th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And so that would be 7:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The second offering is a validation workshop that will be held next Sunday, July 30th at 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And that would be 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Again, next Sunday, July 30th. And in this workshop, the previous validation workshop that was held was a huge success. Lots of aha moments that happened in that workshop. Attendees were stunned to learn just how invalidating we generally are just in our day-to-day communication with others. So it was a fairly successful it was a successful workshop, and everyone who attended was really pleased with the materials that were covered and came out learning a lot more than they anticipated going into the workshop. So if that is of interest to you, again, I will list the registration link for that in today's show notes as well. As a reminder, the group coaching will begin on Tuesday, August the 8th. It will run weekly, every Tuesday, each week. I believe it's at 4 or 4:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And this is a small group setting, supportive environment where I will be coaching those who attend. Each session will incorporate insights and practical tools, actionable strategies, etc., to help you navigate the challenges of estrangement. And we'll cover everything from effective communication techniques and self-care practices. You'll get valuable skills and resources and fostering, healing and growth. Whether your end goal is reconciliation or just simply how do I move forward with my one precious life from here. Space is limited for this group because it is. We'll have direct coaching by me that will take place in this group. This group is limited to, I believe, 7 participants, and with myself will be a total of 8 of us in the group. If you're interested in that, you can email me at theestrangedheart@gmail.com, and I'll get you information on that. Again, that's group coaching, and it is not a support group. A support group is vastly different. A support group is a way to connect with other estranged moms and to discuss our each estrangements and gather support and kind of just a quote unquote meeting of the minds, if you will. While that is guided and directed as well, there isn't as much coaching that takes place. So that is different. Again, this is a group coaching versus a support group. And finally, we are still looking for, AC and I are still looking for estranged adult children to, as well as parents, uh, to join the Facebook group that we are starting in September. I've had several parents reach out wanting to join this group, and I've had very few adult children. And while I think I understand some of the reasons why and hesitation from the estranged adult children, if you would if you would email me and let me know what those concerns are and why you are hesitant or will not participate in such a group, I would really, and I know AC would as well, be interested in hearing those specifics so that we can um, either add to the application process for those who will be in this group to ensure that uh, it's a heavily vetted group, heavily moderated group because of the highly emotional topic that is will be discussed. So I'm trying to make it safe for both estranged parents and estranged adult children to be a part of this group. We really want to bring people together so that we can begin the healing process and learning process. The healing process cannot happen without the curiosity and learning first. And so if you have input on that, um, and would be open to sharing that with us, that would be fantastic. We would love to hear from you. And you can send those emails to theestrangedheart@gmail.com. So I believe that is everything for the announcements. Let's go over our uh, quote for today. And the quote is: respect is honoring a person's thoughts, feelings, and ways of being. Disrespect can be a flagrant making fun of someone, name calling, or refusing to listen. A way that we disrespect someone is also when we use, abuse, or lose other people's belongings. And that is by Dr. Robin Hortstein. So today's episode came about. I was actually scrolling through TikTok and came across a video of a young mom who was at the library with her, I believe, 3-year-old child. And she had an interaction with a elderly gentleman who came in, and that noise you just heard is I'm wanting to play the audio on this video for you because it really, I think she really explained the difference between respect and obedience really well. And I think this is a place where I don't think I know that this is a place where estranged adult children and estranged parents vastly disagree. And I'm hoping that this can bring some clarity to this topic. I'm hoping it can give pause for some to think about exactly what is respect, exactly what is obedience. Am I demanding this because it's simply, quote unquote, the way it's always been? Am I Do I have an expectation around this because this is what I was taught? And if those are some of the lines of thinking, I would encourage you to think about the reasons why, to begin some critical thinking. Why do I believe this? Is this just something that was taught to me and I've just passed it down to my kids, and I think their kids should pass it to their kids, and et cetera, without really giving some critical thought as to why? And I would like to say, in addition to this, I was one of those parents that did not think critically about this until my own estrangement experience happened and the reconciliation occurred. And I think it's very valuable information. I think it's something all parents, I think it would be helpful for all parents to consider. And I think if we can get curious around that, we might find out maybe it's not exactly what we thought it was. Okay. So I'm going to try to play this audio. I am hoping that you can hear this and listen to this woman. Again, she's recording herself in the library just after an interaction with an elderly gentleman um, in the library. And so here we go. Older gentleman at the public library for wearing my hat, and I really wish I caught this on camera. So he walked by me and he told me that is very disrespectful to wear my hat inside. I asked him, "What does being respectful mean to you?" He looked very puzzled. So I said, "I have my 3-year-old over there. Like, how would I explain to him what it means to be respectful?" And he said, "Well, following the rules." And well, obviously, there's no rule about wearing a hat in the library. And I said, "Well, following the rules, that would be obedience, not respect, right?" He goes, "Same thing. You have to respect your elders." I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" Again, he looked very puzzled. He said, "Well, if they tell you it's disrespectful to take your hat off, you take your hat off." I go, "Again, it sounds like you're describing obedience, not respect." I said, "Respect to me is to be kind and understanding of other people." After that, I just introduced myself and I shook his hand and I said, "I really hope you have a nice day." And he left and it was fine. This is the perfect example of the difference between authoritarian parenting and conscious parenting. Authoritarian parenting confuses respect and obedience, and to follow rules for the sake of following rules, and often those rules are based off of preferences, not logic. So I'm trying to teach my son question and challenge. That's okay. Okay. I hope that you were able to hear that. And as a matter of fact, I think I will pause here for just a moment, just to double check my recording and to ensure that that did come through. The audio did come through, and we'll pick up from there in just a moment. Okay, that audio came through loud and clear. So I think everything is good to go. So as I was saying, I was one of those parents who just, my parents, quote unquote, taught me to respect my elders. And basically, teaching me was requiring me to be respectful. It did not, they did not teach me anything about what being respectful meant. It was a requirement, it was a demand, and it was a requirement and demand for obedience. To me, I grew up in the South, being respectful of elders. Uh, oh, really, I mean, not just elders, anyone that was older than you, you must respect. And that, I mean, left zero room for questioning, right? So I learned that I was to quote unquote respect every adult, regardless of what they told me to do, what they asked me to do, etc. And then I, in turn, quote unquote, taught the same thing to my children. And again, there was zero critical thinking there, because here's what, let's just, let me back up a minute. Let's just talk about definitions. Respect. The definition of respect is a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievement, or due regard for the feelings, wishes, rights, and traditions of others. And obedience, the definition of obedience is compliance with an order, request, or law, or submission to another's authority. Okay. So anyone who is older than you, elders, teachers, right? Or if we take that, submission to another's authority. If we look at that from my past experience as a police officer, right? My authority as a police officer demanded the submission of your respect, quote unquote, when in reality, what it demanded was submission of your obedience. So, what are some of the problems that happen as a result of this? When we tell our children that they must be respectful of another human being, we're not teaching them, oh, yes, please be respectful of others unless they are abusing you, unless they are physically harming you, unless they are mentally harming you, unless they are emotionally harming you. And I want you to think about this. I want you to take yourself out of the picture for just a second. I want you to take yourself out, and I want you to think on the macro scale, not the micro, but the macro scale. And if we look at this belief that we are to respect our elders, I don't know about you, but there have been plenty of elders in my life who have been anything but respectful to me as a human being. There have been police officers who have been anything but respectful to me. Instead, they demanded my blind obedience. So, what we are teaching children and teaching others by this blanket respect our elders thing is we're teaching them to accept rude behaviors from others. We're teaching them a lack of boundaries. And we're teaching them to not question when someone violates them and their personhood. So if a child, if a teenager, if an adolescent is being sexually abused by someone who is older than them, thereby an elder, And we have taught them you are to be respectful, period, end of story. Well, kids take that as black and white. I have to respect this person. I can't speak up. I can't speak out. I can't tell them to stop. They're harming me. I can't go tell another person because then that would be disrespectful of the person who was abusing me. So we have set this up to be a blanket thing, this blanket belief, when in reality it is very nuanced, right? There's respect and there's obedience. And if you are demanding that your adult children respect you, and that respect means to comply with all and everything that you say and all of your wishes, then that is obedience. That is not respect. That is blind obedience. I think I haven't had this conversation with my daughters, but I believe that they have a level of respect for me today because I'm not the authoritarian parent who demands obedience anymore. I earn their respect because I give them respect. I respect them in their decisions. I don't tell them what they should do. Or when they make a decision, I don't tell them, wow, that's not a decision I would make. Um, you sure you thought that through? Or, oh my God, I can't believe you made that. I can't believe you did that. You really, like, that was a decision you came to? Or, your husband or your wife is really controlling. You need to get a grip on that. I don't say anything like that to them. And I have a level of respect from them because of that. Because I'm not saying, I'm your elder and I think you've made a horrible decision and therefore you need to do what I think you need to do. That's obedience, plain and simple. I think that even on some level, in addition to that, there's this, I'm always talking about getting beneath the surface. Things aren't as they appear on the surface. And if we dig deeper into that, I think there's almost a there I think there's a piece for parents who came from the generation of this blind obedience, because I'm not going to call it respect because it's not. I think when you were required to have blind obedience for your elders, I think that there's a subconscious part of us, parents of the older generations, that almost believe this, well, I had to suffer through this, so should you. Now, I'm not saying that you've consciously had that thought and that you consciously want your children to suffer. I don't believe that. But I do think that there is an underlying narrative that doesn't get questioned. And yes, maybe you did suffer. I have to tell you, the estranged parents I talk to, and I from my coaching clients to those in my support group to those who just email me on a weekly basis, across the board, the boomer generation, there was so much abuse. So much abuse. And I think that part of that came from this blind obedience, to not question, to not argue, to not talk back. Children were seen, or were to be seen and not heard, all of that. And our kids today are saying, no more, no more, no more for me and no more for my children. And I have to agree with that. I worked in a field in law enforcement, public safety, where I saw that blind obedience, and I saw that blind obedience give unchecked power to people who harmed others because of it. I am not a fan of just this quote unquote respect your elders just because. Not at all. I think that parents who lived under that type of ruling, if you will, and that's how I look at it, from their parents. That's what I did to my kids. I was, I ruled the roost, and I was queen of my house, and it was my kingdom, and those were my rules, and you did not question them, right? How many times, something as simple as how many times did your kids when they were growing up not want to go give somebody a hug, and you were like, "Go on, come on, that's just Uncle Joe. Go give Uncle Joe a hug." And the kid is like, "I don't want to hug Uncle Joe." And you're like, "Stop being disrespectful. Go give your uncle a hug." When maybe Uncle Joe was abusing that child. Like, I can't get on board with that. And that is one of my biggest regrets as a parent, is forcing my children into this blind obedience, because that's the way that I was raised and I didn't question it. So I raised them that way. And unbeknownst to me, in large part, and I have only learned through therapy, that a large part of that was because, in my childhood, I was not seen, heard, or validated. And that, respect is a two-way street. We can respect our children when we can see, hear, and validate their experiences. We're respecting them. We're showing respect. And when respect is given from that level and not from this required obedience, I've not seen a case where respect hasn't been received back. So it's food for thought. And I know that parents who are older have this mindset that, my kid doesn't respect me. And I just invite you to consider, is it respect that I'm wanting? And if it is, am I demanding it? Because respect can't be demanded. If it's demanding, it's obedience. So I think I will leave it there for today. Until next time. This brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent, and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, perhaps entertaining becoming a guest on our show, or following us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. As a reminder, there is an online support group on Facebook. If you are a estranged mom who identifies as being spiritual and approaches estrangement with a sense of curiosity rather than blame and judgment, and desire to do inner self-work and reflection, please seek us out. We can be found at facebook.com/estranged mothers support group. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com.